with where this love of music for you evolved with? Was it simply those nights with the transistor radio clamped to your ear, listening to Radio Luxembourg as you were growing up?
But certainly part of it, yeah. I've thought about this a lot, and we didn't have any records at home until I was a teenager. But my mother's family is a big family. She had 5 brothers and 3 sisters, and all her brothers played at least one instrument very, very well. Most of them played 2 or 3. And I wonder whether that might not have piqued my interest in the first place when I was extremely young, 3 and 4 years old. At Christmas, they would have a band, not an electric band, but it would be trumpets, trombones, and all that sort of thing. And they all played very, very well. And so we would have a band in the evening, or all the evenings over Christmas, and maybe that was the first thing that got me interested. But then after that, I think I always liked music, but it was really rock and roll that got me really interested. The greats of rock and roll like Elvis, Chuck Berry, and Little Richard, they were probably the first ones I listened to, probably on my transistor radio, listening to Luxembourg. And then later on, people like Buddy Holly and particularly Ricky Nelson. I really liked Ricky Nelson. And then the Beatles happened and everything changed.
Yeah,
and
true.
They just...
It was
I can't say any more than that, really. Everybody honed in on the Beatles, including, as was then, the Zombies. I think we were a band, and we were actually called the Zombies by the time we heard the Beatles very early on.
But at this time, when you look back, there is a beautiful simplicity to how things came about. So your grammar school, your all-boys grammar school,
yes,
where you were all sat in alphabetical order.
That's correct.
And so, put it simply, if you hadn't been in alphabetical order, then Paul, who knew Rod, perhaps maybe wouldn't have asked you if you were interested in joining the band, and you may never have joined and become a singer.
Absolutely. In some ways it's fascinating. In some ways it's a bit scary, actually, when you realise how much chance there is in your life and your choices that you've made. As you said, if I hadn't been sitting in alphabetical order, I might not have been in the music business for the whole of my life. And there've been other things that happened. We won this big rock and roll competition. It was called the Heart's Beat competition. Really? I wasn't all that keen on going in for that competition. I'll be honest, I didn't think we stood a chance, And when we won the first heat, there were 10 bands a night, and it ran for 10 weeks, so there were 100 bands. When we won the first heat, I thought, wow, I took the breath out of me, and I thought, wow, this is brilliant. We won. And when we won the competition, the whole thing, that's the first time I dared to think that there might be a way ahead for us as a professional band. I didn't say anything, but I thought possibly there was a way ahead.
What did Rod think, by the way, when you turned up to the audition, when you all got together in the room and you rocked in with a broken nose and 2 black eyes?
But I know exactly what he thought. Yes, I broke my nose on the Wednesday, and the first meeting first rehearsal was on the Saturday morning. I know exactly what he thought, because we met outside this pub called the Blacksmith's Arms in St Albans. Yeah, and so the only guy I knew was the guy who sat alphabetically in front of me at school, and he was late, so I didn't know any of them. And Rod looked at me and thought, oh my God, I hope he hasn't turned up to be in the band, because he looks a bit scary. And because he told me, I looked like a zombie. I was just ahead of my time, because the band wasn't known as the Zombies for probably another year after we first got together. But
because you had the naming rituals. This was another great thing. And there were some fabulous names there. The one that I particularly liked more than any of the others was Chatterley and the Gamekeepers.
I don't remember that one. But
I don't remember that one.
No,
somebody came up with it.
Yeah, we tried everything. And then Paul Arnold, the guy who sat in front of me at school, he's from somewhere, just out of the blue. I can hear it now. He didn't say it directly to me, but I could hear it from somewhere over in the room. And he said, "What about the zombies?" And everybody sort of stopped. And I got no idea what a zombie was then. And if I'm really honest, I don't think I really understand what a zombie is now. But it stuck, and all the guys loved it. I was a bit suspicious of it, really. I wasn't too sure, but it stuck, and it was memorable. And we hadn't got anything better, so that's what we went with. And the others all loved it.
You had the Mustangs, didn't you?
We did.
The Mustangs and the Sundowners.
We were the Mustangs for a couple of weeks, but we realised that there were loads of other Mustangs around the country. You know, you'd get Melody Maker or something like that, and you'd see the Mustangs from Middlesbrough and the Mustangs from Cardiff. I mean, well, we've got to drop that. And then for my sins, I came up with the idea of the Sundowners from the film with
movie
Robert Mitchum and I can't remember. Robert Mitchum was in it.
Deborah Kerr.
Deborah Kerr, you're right. And we remembered that the Searchers had got their name from a John Wayne film. So I was thinking, what films could we think of? And the Sundowners came to mind. But I think the Sundowners lasted shorter than the Mustangs. It's pretty awful. And eventually, yeah, we went with the Zombies. And it served us quite well. Yes.
The Watford Town Hall, 10 weeks of 10 bands, and you're going to the final, and you did on that night. You can't do that and Summertime. And obviously you won. Do you remember any of the other performers that were on that final night? Did anybody else go on to have success, or that you bumped into in years that followed?
I don't think so. I can't remember particularly whether these bands were in the final, but they were in the competition. There were two St Albans bands in there, the Bluetones, and the bass player for the Bluetones was the wonderful Jim Rodford, who later on, he's Rod's cousin, and he'd first interested Rod in being in a band. Rod went to see the Bluetones with his cousin Jim Rodford playing bass. He thought they were fantastic, which they were, because I went and saw them as well. They were great. And that's what first gave him the idea of forming a band. And the Bluetones were definitely in the competition, as were a band called the Trespassers. And they were a St Albans band, and I knew the bass player in that band as well. I think the Trespassers is a great name. I wish we'd nicked that before they did. They were in the competition, but I'm not sure if the Bluetones and the Trespassers were in the final or not. But they were both really good local bands.
So you get the deal with Decca. I mean, this is a massive thing. And initially, your first album was going to be all covers until Ken Jones said, why don't you do one of your own? 24 hours later, or 48 hours later, Rod returns with She's Not There in his hand, the first song he ever wrote.
Well, it was sort of. He later said he had actually written a couple of tunes before, but he kept it very quiet. So it was the first song I knew of that he'd written. Ken Jones was our producer, and he was giving us a pep talk about a week before we went into our first proper studio session. And in the middle of that pep talk, he said, of course, you could always write something for the session, and then went on and talked about other things. And I certainly didn't take that much notice of what he said, but Rod and Chris did, and Rod wrote She's Not There, and Chris White wrote a wonderful B-side called You Make Me Feel Good. And when they came back with those songs, there was a lot of talk of which was the stronger song. Obviously, in the end, She's Not There has become a great classic. But the thought that if Ken, again, it's chance, isn't it? If Ken Jones hadn't have said that, would Rod have gone home and written that song? And as you said, he wrote it sort of in a couple of days. I was amazed. When he came back, I was amazed. I didn't know he could write songs in the first place. And then, I think we all knew it was a special song fairly early on. And,
just a quick word about Ken, by the way.
Yes.
Who had this remarkably varied career. He was working with Jim Dale, who went on to act in all those Carry On films, but he was a huge star over in the States. But more famously, he composed TV themes, including the Galton and Simpson classic Steptoe and Son.
Yeah, he was a writer and an arranger as well as a producer. And again, we were introduced to him by chance. We'd been offered a couple of deals, and Chris White had an uncle, I think it was, who knew Ken Jones. And Chris White's uncle said, "Why don't you go and talk to Ken Jones about these deals that you've been offered?" Which we did. And Ken was a lovely guy, and he spent 2 or 3 hours going through what was on offer for us, the opportunities that we had. And at the end, again, he said, "Well, I think my company," he was in a partnership with a guy called Joe Roncoroni, "I think our company can offer you better than these offers." He'd gone through them and been very fair and explained them to us. And that's what happened. We signed to Ken Jones' production company, and also his publishing company. And he also became our producer. So in many ways, we were exclusively signed to Ken Jones and Joe Roncoroni. We never signed to a record company. And this has helped us in later life because the rights to our records have reverted to us. And that's what has made these re-releases less challenging, shall we say, that we haven't had to deal with major labels.
Now, the recording of She's Not There is just such an incredible story. I mean, it looks funny now, but in Hampstead and being sort of the mature, cool cats that you were at 19, you want to go for the night session. But the engineer's been out and he's been at a wedding and he's drunk and eventually basically falls over, passes out. You've got to carry him out. And there's where the twist of fate happens again, because you end up with Gus Dudgeon, who gets his big break, and it turns into an incredible night.
It was, and all of these I'm sure this happens in everyone's careers. There are just these chance things. The engineer and incidentally, we didn't book a nighttime session. It was Ken Jones that booked the session, and I think it was quite fashionable at that time to record through the night. I couldn't do it now. I wouldn't last. And as you rightly said, we arrived, and the engineer, who was a very successful engineer, really good engineer, it's just unfortunate, had been at a wedding all day, and not only was he blind drunk, but he was very abusive and aggressive and loud. And I remember putting on the headphones, and he was screaming down the headphones, and I was thinking to myself, and it makes me laugh. I've been in the business for 60 odd years now, but this is within the first 20 minutes, and I thought, I don't think this is for me. This is a bit weird. But as you rightly said, it was a bit of luck. He passed out cold, and we had to carry him out. And Gus Dudgeon was the tape op. He wasn't a recording engineer. He was just switching the tape on and off. Obviously, whether he recorded with us or not, eventually he would have been an engineer and probably a producer later on anyway. But it happened this way. The engineer collapsed. Gus had to take over. And that was his first session ever, and he never forgot that. And it was our first session ever, and we never forgot it either. And of course, Gus went on to produce many of Elton John's albums, David Bowie, Kiki D, many, many huge stars.
And he's also in the Guinness Book of Records, isn't he, as the first to use sampling in a production. And the other first here was the electric piano intro. It was the first time in the UK a hit song had ever had it as its lead instrument.
Oh, I didn't know that. But I do know that, you see, the Zombies were always a keyboard-based band that featured harmonies. It was a kind of a unique sound. It wasn't always fashionable. I think we lost work as an amateur band because we weren't three guitars. But whether you liked it or not, it was different. It was quite different. Don't think there were any other bands doing that. There was the Animals, perhaps were keyboard based, and Manfred Mann were perhaps keyboard based, but they didn't do the harmonies as we did. A lot of our songs were certainly three-part harmony. When we recorded, sometimes it could be more than that. Rod had spent many years in the cathedral choir, and apart from being a world-class keyboard player, which really helps with sorting out harmonies, he understood harmonies from his time in the cathedral choir as well. So a lot of our harmonies were quite different to what other people were doing.
And it was also surprisingly, I saw somewhere, it was inspired by John Lee Hooker's "No One Told Me."
I think just that first line, often songs are written from a trigger, aren't they? It doesn't have to be a true story about one person. It can be little bits and pieces of people you've met or places you've been to. But often that in the first place, there's a trigger. It can be anything, a chord change, a song title, or in this case, a John Lee Hooker song called "No One Told Me." That's the only similarity. Rod always emphasises that, and I'll emphasise it now. You know, there's no similarities between the songs at all.
You did get the thumbs up from George Harrison on the music programme of the day, Jukebox Jury.
We did.
Thumbs up for a hit.
I know. And, you know, we were so thrilled. We were huge Beatles fans. And to get, you know, a positive from George Harrison on Jukebox Jury, I couldn't believe it. It was a bit dreamlike, to be honest. Absolutely wonderful. And of course, apart from the thrill, the personal thrill of George Harrison saying he liked it, it really helped you to have a hit record as well. If a Beatle said they liked it, it's probably going to be a hit. It's just
it was, wasn't it? I mean, number 2 in the US. I mean, people would give limbs to get recognition that you had in the US, and it led to the invite for you to be on Murray Kay's Christmas shows at the Fox Theatre in New York. Transatlantic travel was not the norm. There weren't 15 different airlines flying over there 10 times a day. It's a big event. So how did you feel rocking up to Heathrow to get on an aeroplane? Was it the first time you'd flown?
I think it was second or third time. The first time I flew, we had to go to Top of the Pops in Manchester, and because we were on tour, we actually had to fly there. And to show you how naive I was, I tried, as I sat down in the plane, I tried not to press down with my feet because I thought the plane would struggle if I was pressing down with I tried to make myself light. When we flew, and then I think we went to Norway. We that was the first time we went abroad, and we came back from Norway and pretty much immediately went to America. And of course, it's an extraordinary experience. But just again to show you how grounded we were, my parents knew that we were flying from Heathrow, and there was quite a crowd there to see us off. And my mother, bless her, fought her way through the crowd to give me a packed lunch for the... She'd done me some sandwiches for the plane. So I had to accept this. And there was a bit of a ruckus, actually. She gave me sandwiches, which I ate, and an apple, which I didn't eat. And when I got to America, one of the things you can't do in America is take fruit into the country. So I was taken aside because I got this bloody apple in my bag. So that was a bit of drama. And this same guy, I was a bit alarmed because it's the first time I've ever seen a gun. They all wear guns, all of them. And this guy takes me aside and walked me quite a long way off. Started off with the apple thing. And he said, listen, I want you to just come over here. Took me into a telephone box, dialed a number. He said, would you just speak to my daughter? Because she's a big fan. She wants to talk. I thought I was going to be locked up. So it was a crazy time of, you know, flying across the Atlantic, as you say, which was quite a big event in those days. And then the mundane of your mum fighting through the crowd to give you a packed lunch to get on the plane. You had to be on your toes because just crazy things were happening all the time. Incidentally, in America, in Cashbox, which was equally authoritative in those days, She's Not There went to number 1. I just thought I would slip that in. She's Not There was number 1 in Cashbox and number 2 in Billboard. You're only going to go to number 1 a few times in your life, so I just want to establish that it did go to number 1.
Nobody had, this is a Decca, mentioned anything to you about image. There were no image consultants. So, you were teenagers, basically, not long out of school. And, people were sort of drawn towards, as they always are, the bad boys, the rogues. But you were the exact opposite. And I noted a piece in the US press on your arrival that said he's very clean-cut, mild-mannered, intelligent, and behave like gentlemen.
Not all the time, I hasten to add, but yes, I know there was an element of that. I think it's when things started to go wrong for us, which was, before She's Not There was even released, probably. We went to Decca one morning and we were sent to the press department, I think, and they said, what's the image? What is, and we're going, well, I don't know, what can you say? And I don't want to over-elaborate this because it starts the whole thing again, but I'll just very quickly say, they said to someone, what have you been doing? Like, what can we build an image on? And someone said, wasn't me, well, we've only just left school, so we haven't got much to talk about, really. Only just left school. The conversation goes on to, how many O-levels, that's GCSEs for younger people, how many O-levels did you get, and A-levels and whatnot? And it gradually was dragged out of us. We weren't particularly bright, but we got a few A-levels. That's going to be your image. Totally wrong. We were doomed from that moment onwards. But no one wants academic geeks, even though we weren't. And nobody wants that. They want bad boys. They want pirates. Not us. And that's how we started off with a black mark against our names, I'm afraid. But we didn't know any better.
You're on these shows with,
yes.
Legends, Benny King, the Shirelles, the Shangri-Las, and then after this you go on to do this show called the Hullabaloo show with Jack Jones. So yes. What was it like working with, people that you probably heard of, but you'd never met before, all these enormous stars, established stars?
I think looking back now, it's probably more scary than it was at the time. There were 5 of us. We've been through quite a lot already, and we just, what's tomorrow? We'll just do it. And it's sort of confidence of youth. I think you don't think things through. The Murray the K show at the Brooklyn Fox was a little bit challenging. I've got to be honest. You've mentioned some of the names, but Patti LaBelle was also on the bill at that time. She had a singing group with her called the Bluebells. Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. Yeah. Patti LaBelle is a huge star in America, and she was then, and we had to follow her in the show. And there were sort of 8 shows a day. You just sang a couple of songs, and then someone else sang a couple of songs, and there was 16 people on the bill or something, like, roughly speaking. And so she would do her spot with the Bluebells, and she'd bring the house down, and we had to then walk on the stage. And the first time we did it, I must admit, I was a bit apprehensive, but we were okay. It could have gone one or two ways. It was packed with a very, very loud audience, and it could have gone one or two ways, but we were okay. We were all right.
This really was the beginning of this non-stop touring schedule. You were back in the US within months. In April, you were on Dick Clark's Caravan of Stars, which had been going since the late 50s, was hugely successful. Again, 10 to 15 artists, 2 or 3 songs per set. The Yardbirds had done it. The Stones had been on it. But you have a little bit of an initiation ceremony, don't you, when you join the bus with all the other acts on that first night, because they want you to get up and do a performance.
Well, it's true. There were some wonderful singers on that bus, and they'd come from a church background, and they could harmonise, and it was beautiful the way they sang. And we'd probably remarked about it. We were just blown away. They were fabulous. And they said, okay, now it's your turn. What are you going to sing? There was no avoiding this. It was absolute silence, and that's what was said. And Ron and I looked at one another and said, what are we going to do? And we decided to do If I Fell, because there's a nice harmony line, so the 2 of us could sing it together. And we knew it. And though I say it myself, I think we did do a fairly passable version, and we got through our audition. It was okay. Having said that, we'd done it once before. We had a night off in Blackpool, and we're walking up and down the front, and we walked up behind 2 unsuspecting young girls, and we thought, we'll sing If I Fell to them. and then they'll then they'll be completely overwhelmed and be our girlfriends or something. Anyway, we sang "If I Fell" to them, and they took one look at us and they just ran away at 100 miles an hour. So when we started "If I Fell" on this bus, I wasn't fully confident what kind of reaction we were going to get, but luckily it was a bit different to Blackpool, and they really liked it.
The festival circuit in the US and these big day events that they used to have, you appeared on one in July of that year with the Beach Boys. You were in Nashville and Jacksonville. Now, you know, the surf culture in the US, it seemed like an absolute marriage made in heaven with them and you on the same bill. What do you remember about working or being on the bill with the Beach Boys?
Well, it's very exciting. I was a huge fan of theirs, and it was huge audiences when we played those kind of bills. I watched them from the side. I loved every minute of it. I thought they were wonderful. It was interesting because around there was some kind of hiccup in the routing of the tour, and so the Beach Boys and us stayed for a week in Nashville at the same motel. So there were lots of just lying around the pool, playing around, just catching up with what they've been doing, what we've been doing. So it was a very interesting little interval in Nashville at that time.
So the follow-up to
She's my favourite bands, by the way. Yeah.
I was going to say the follow-up to She's Not There, Tell Her No. Again, big hit in the US, not so much so in the UK, but it was described as the precursor to jazz fusion. But once again, it's the story around the recording, which is worth noting. I mean, you must have told the story 1,000 times, being dragged up to the mic to start singing at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and then that mumbled line, which they decided to keep in, which was just a piece of genius because it's been a conversation starter and a piece of trivia for the last 60 years as to what it was that was actually said.
Well, it's nothing. It's mumbo jumbo. And I remember going back into the control room and saying to Ken Jones, our producer, "I'm really sorry, Ken. I fluffed that line. Can we drop in and do that?" And he said, "Oh, don't worry about that. That's fine. That's fine." I couldn't believe it. And the record went to, I think, number 6 in the charts. I probably am going by Cashbox. Billboard might be a couple lower. I don't know. But I seem to remember number 6 in the charts. And maybe there's a lesson for people there. I mean, I've spent hours and hours trying to get a vocal as pristine, fabulous as I can possibly get it. And there's a throwaway vocal with a mumbled line in the middle of it, and it sells 1 million copies. I don't know what that tells you, actually, but, don't bother about trying to make it too good, perhaps. I don't know.
Do you know what, there was in hindsight as well, wasn't there, a good piece of advice that was handed out to you by Rudy on that Isley Brothers tour?
Yes, yes.
When he said to you, check your statements, don't ever trust managers, and be very careful of contracts.
All that kind of thing. He talked to us for a long time. It's Rod and me. Talked to us for a long time. And we were very young, and we said, no, we're completely confident and in what's going on, everything's fine. And really it wasn't. There were problems, and I don't want to get too personal about it because the main person is not around anymore, and it's not even just him. It's the industry that can get a bit that way if you're not ultra careful. And we probably should have listened to him. But then I sometimes wonder, I think most bands go through this period in the first 3 or 4 years where, they're not going to make any money for one reason or another. I've spoken to so many bands that you would have thought would be millionaires very early on, and they'd say, we had nothing. And you have to stick at it, really stick at it. And then eventually the recognition and the credibility and the financial gain comes along. But it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
It is incredible to think that back then, in reality, far from being what you thought, which was that you weren't very successful, you were having hits all over the world. And the case in point here, but that perhaps brought this home was when you arrived in the Philippines in '67 to play, you know, what you thought was a small gig in a hotel bar.
Exactly.
And how many turned up?
But for the first gig, it was 28,000 on a Friday night. It was in the Araneta Coliseum, which at that time I think was the second biggest coliseum in the world. There was one slightly bigger in America. We did a matinee of 15,000, and on a Saturday night we did 32,000, and that went on for 10 days. And we thought that we were going to be playing in a bar in a hotel, and we were being paid as if we were going to play in a bar in a hotel. So we're standing up. I think we got, as I remember, about £100 a night between us. But we paid 20% to our manager, 10% to agency. That's 30% gone. We're down to 70 quid between five. So we're earning, you know, just over £10 a night each for playing to 32,000 people. And that's, I mean, even the penny dropped, even to us then. And we left that management situation shortly afterwards. But we never found another manager. So in a way, it probably was the beginning of the end of the band. We realised it was time to move on. But
what? Go on.
Well, I said we never managed to find another manager. Instead, there was a negotiation that I wasn't part of at all, so it's hard for me to give any details, with CBS, who agreed that we would record an album for them. And from memory, they gave us £1,000 to record this album. And again, I don't know how we managed to get into Abbey Road, which at that time was called EMI Studios.
EMI.
And was exclusively for EMI artists. And we were on CBS. I think we might have been the first non-EMI artist to record in EMI Studios. It certainly was very rare. But of course we had to, it was a very expensive studio even in those days. And so we had to record very, very quickly because we only had £1,000. So we rehearsed extensively. Why everyone doesn't do this all the time, I don't know. We rehearsed extensively before we went into the studio. So we always knew what songs we were going to do, what key they were going to be in and what the arrangement was. We're just looking for a performance. We were in Studio 3. The Beatles had just finished Sgt. Pepper, mostly recorded in Studio 2, just a couple of days before we went in. When we went into Studio 3, they had been in there, and a lot of the percussion instruments were lying around on the floor, and we were picking up the percussion instruments that the Beatles had left there, which I got quite a kick out of. And we were using the same engineers, Peter Vince and Jeff. I'm so bad on names. Everyone will know who Jeff is. He's sadly recently died, actually, but he was one of the main engineers who worked with the Beatles, and then later
one of the other guys you got to know there at that time was a young man working as an engineer called Alan Parsons.
That's right. He worked on Odyssey and Oracle, but also he lived in or around Hampstead. And I lived in West Hampstead at that time, and I used to walk up the hill to Hampstead Village and go in the pub in Hampstead Village. They had Young's beer, the Flask, I think it's called.
The Flask, and it's still there, by the way.
Yeah, it's a fabulous pub. I do recommend it to everyone. And they have this Young's beer. Always have the ordinary. Don't have the special. Ordinary. And I got there on a Saturday morning, and Alan would be in there, and we would have a nod and a chat. And then years later, he got this idea of recording with the producer being the central figure, not an artist. The producer was the central figure. And it was the Alan Parsons project, which he got going with a silent partner called Eric Wilson, who actually was the main writer. But it was named the Alan Parsons project, and they would use guest vocalists. And I guess he remembered the Odyssey and Oracle days and the pints of beer up in Hampstead Village. And he tried to get me for the first album, but I was living in California and I couldn't do it. But he got me for the second album, which was called Pyramid. And I sang The Eagle Will Rise Again. Beautiful song. Beautiful.
The real disappointment here was the response on release initially. It was poor in the UK, and CBS didn't even want to release it in the US.
We're back to Odyssey and Oracle. We're
Yeah,
back.
Odyssey and
Yeah.
Oracle. So
Yes.
anyway, this legendary producer, Al Cooper, who not only Blood, Sweat and Tears, who went on to do Lynyrd Skynyrd's first 3 albums. He worked with the Stones, he worked with Bob Dylan. I mean, the guy is an absolute legend. And he got behind it and was the driver and said, no, this has to be put out. This is just a fabulous album and it needs to be heard.
Al Cooper was incredible. You see, this is another chance thing, really. He'd been in London and he'd bought about 80 albums. And he just said one album really stood out, and it was Odyssey and Oracle. He went back to New York. It was his first day working as a producer for CBS. And he went into the head of CBS's office, Clive Davis, a very famous guy, a hugely powerful guy. He's very brave of him. It's his first day. He went into Clive Davis's office and he said that we have to get this album. Whatever it costs, we have to get this album. And Clive Davis said to him, we already own this album. We weren't even going to release it. And Al Cooper fought for it. It wouldn't have even been released if it hadn't been for Al Cooper. It was released. Well, it wasn't a huge success. They released 3 singles. Al Cooper wasn't involved in the first 3 choices of singles, but eventually he went back in and said, you must try Time of the Season. And eventually they took his advice and released Time of the Season. Again, even then it was slow. One DJ in Boise, Idaho started playing Time of the Season and wouldn't stop playing it. And in those days, it was possible for one DJ to kind of, by playing it all the time, other stations would pick it up. It's like a ripple effect with a stone going into a pool. And that's what happened. It was a very slow burner. Maybe that's what they call it. It took months for it to go through the charts. And I hasten to add that in Cashbox, Time of the Season went to #1 as well. Although in Billboard, I believe it was 2 or 3. But I always quote Cashbox,
But sadly, though, you were already over at the time.
I know. It was
You'd
a little
had that
bit late.
final meeting with
We did.
Chris and Rod in their flat. And it just all came to this very amicable end. It was almost like, at the end of the night, you just said, well, it's been a good run. So, all right, guys, see you around.
It was a little bit like that. I alluded earlier on to the fact that we hadn't got a manager. We hadn't got an agent. We hadn't got any work. It just seemed as though the band had run out of time, that really. And Rod sort of called a meeting at his flat he shared with Chris White and with the artist, Terry Quirk, who did the artwork for Odyssey and Oracle and famously spelt the name wrong. Fabulous artist, but not a very good speller.
Great song. Sorry.
Anyway, we met up in this, and I thought at the meeting, that's what was going to happen. We'd say, look, guys, it's been great. But in those days, people thought a lifespan of a band would be 3 or 4 years anyway. And I thought that was what's going to happen. Actually, it was slightly different because Paul Atkinson, the guitarist in the band, had just got married. And he started the meeting by saying, guys, I've just got married. I have absolutely no money. I had that in common with him, but I hadn't got married. I hadn't got any money either. And that sort of started the conversation, really. And it was decided that probably the band had to finish.
It does sound amusing now, and it probably raises a smile for you and many others, but US promoters were desperate for the band to be out there after the Time of the Season and the album. And there was big interest, and in this desperate bid to cash in on the success, they announced that you died, and there are fake bands appearing here, there, and everywhere. One of which, I couldn't believe this, one of which included Dusty Hill and Frank Beard, who went on, of course, to join Billy Gibbons and become ZZ Top.
Absolutely. Well, listen, I'm all in favour of musicians getting work. It's hard enough getting work for musicians, so I think good luck to them. That hopefully kept them going for a while they were the Zombies. I think there were 3 or 4 bands being the Zombies, and Chris White was in New York, and he was in the offices of Rolling Stone, and they were discussing. In fact, it was a front page story. The zombies and animals and other people were all being impersonated. And they said, well, one of the bands was managed by some guy down in the south of the States. The Rolling Stone got Chris White to phone this manager. And the manager thought it was someone from Rolling Stone. And they said, well, so what's the story with this band? And the guy said, well, the lead singer of the Zombies was tragically killed in a car crash. And to honour his name, we wanted to start up a Zombies to play Zombies music and so forth. And this is in Rolling Stone, and I'm sitting there, I'm reading it. You died in a car crash. And I thought, this announcement is a little bit premature. But anyway, that was the story. So I was a zombie that died 50 or so years ago.
The thing about Odyssey and Oracle then now is that from being literally cast aside, dropped into the waste basket or the trash can in CBS, it is now revered as one of the greatest albums ever. Rolling Stone is in the 500 greatest. NME, Q, Mojo, The Guardian in the top 100 albums of all time. It's in the book, 1,000 albums to hear before you die. People pour over it, from Terry Quirk's misspelling of Odyssey to the quotes from The Tempest, Shakespeare on the front cover. And then there's the discussion about what it is musically, because it's called this psychedelic, work of art. And psychedelia didn't really exist back then. So how have you come to terms with everything that it became in the years after its release?
It's quite difficult, really, because obviously it was very disappointing when it came out. My feeling when we'd finished the album, I remember it quite clearly, was it was the best we could possibly do at that time. And then when it wasn't celebrated in any way when it was released, you start to think, well, maybe I got it wrong. And it was hugely disappointing. And I'm not sure I ever really got over that, to be honest. It is great that huge artists now do celebrate that album and say it's one of their favourite, or their favourite album of all time. It's wonderful that they say that, of course. And it's difficult to really sort of understand how you should react, because it's from such a long time ago. And it's so deeply steeped for me in disappointment. I'm just great. I'm grateful, but perhaps not in a way I would have been at the time. I don't want to sound as though I'm disingenuous or anything like that, but my focus has always been on what I'm doing now and what comes next. Yeah. And that's where my energies always go.
So you got tempted back into singing by Mike Hurst, who'd had the success with Cat Stevens, and you're up at Olympic Studios. Now you were going to be, this is another one of these wonderful stories from your life and career. You were going to be Jamie MacArthur, until you were told by the Americans that, hey, no, you can't do that. There's a very famous actor of the same name, so you've got to change that. Now, we wouldn't have known him back then because Hawaii Five-0 was not on the television in the UK in the 60s, but in the 70s it was. And the famous actor was Dano, who had that famous line, didn't he, from Jack Lord, who was in Hawaii Five-0, would turn around, or they'd literally end every program with, "Book 'em, Dano."
Yeah. It certainly was that actor the whole thing was so arbitrary. I think I could have ended up with any. I don't know why my name was changed. I actually spent quite a long time with Mike Hurst a year ago or something like that, and I thought the name change was his idea, and I think he thought the name change was my idea. Somewhere along the line, because Mike came up with this idea of re-recording "She's Not There," and maybe it even came from me, a chance comment. I thought, well, she's not there, and using my name, isn't that a bit weird? And maybe it came from there. But yeah, I was Neil MacArthur for years. Very confusing to suddenly have a new name. I always pull this gag that I didn't, people would say Neil to me, and I didn't know if it was a noun or a verb. I'm sorry, it's a bit of a well-worn gag, but it's kind of true.
They're always the best. The old ones.
The old ones are the best ones. So I was Neil MacArthur for a year, and Neil had a little bit of success. That She's Not There just about crept into the top 30 or 31 or something like that. Then there were two more singles.
We get to the real beginnings of this hugely successful and diversified solo career over the last 30, 40, 50 years. Year one, which you began recording at Sound Technique Studios that were up in Chelsea at the time before. Again, you're moving to Abbey Road, and Rod and Chris are back on the scene. So it's great to see that you still have relationships with these guys as well. But it was your first meeting with a man that you described as being totally and utterly unique. Chris Gunning, the man who was responsible for all the string arrangements and who helped weave this very, very immersive sound on this debut album.
Chris Gunning was very young. I think this was probably one of his first jobs. He's stunning, absolutely stunning. Stunning Gunning, now I come to think of it. Very humble, unassuming guy. Came in with, I can remember him playing me. I don't know if you're familiar, there's a song called Misty Roses on one year.
Yes.
And it's got a sort of a 2 or 3 minute instrumental section, which is a string quartet in the area of Bartók, the classical composer. I didn't know Chris all that well, but I went round to his house and he played me that musical interlude on the piano, not as a string quartet. I hadn't got a clue what he was talking about. It was all over the place. If you can imagine that on the piano, I thought, well, you seem to know what you're doing. Let's give it a go. And Misty Roses was actually recorded in really 3 separate sections. It was the first bit was recorded very, very quickly with me and a guitarist, but we realised it was very short. I think it was only about a minute and a half. And then we have Chris's wonderful, wonderful string arrangement in the middle. And then he comes back to the actual, more of the melody of the song. And I had to sing over that when the strings had all gone down. So I sang the first bit live, then the strings went down, and they did 2 verses and a middle 8. And I put the vocal on separately afterwards, and I was quite worried about singing over those extraordinary harmonies that he developed. I wasn't sure if I could really hold the melody against them, but it's wonderful writing, and when it comes to it, it's easier than you think. I thought that was going to be quite challenging, but it was fine. But it was recorded.
Tony Visconti involved as well.
He was, from memory, he actually co-wrote the arrangement on 2 of the tracks. Caroline Goodbye, which is currently number 4 in the Heritage charts. I just thought I'd drop in. We did a live version of that last year.
Fabulous.
On a live album, and it's been put out as a single. It's number 4 in the Heritage charts. Tony Visconti co-arranged that with Rod Argent. And then there was another track called Mary Won't You Warm My Bed, which was written by Mike Darbo, wonderful writer and great artist as well. And Tony Visconti co-wrote that with Rod Argent as well.
It's been called many things, the album, by many people. Romantic, classic British pop music. And again, you've managed to work yourself into the list of 1,000 albums or 100 albums you have to hear before you die. But it simply just chronicles a year in your life. It is a very personal album, and summed up perhaps mostly by Caroline Goodbye, because that was, you're talking about Caroline Munro. This is, it takes something to want to put that out there for everybody else to see and hear what you're going
I'm not as brave as perhaps people might think, because I always thought I would change the name. It was written as Caroline Goodbye, but I always thought before we got in the studio I'd change the name, and the studio date was getting closer and closer. I couldn't come up with another name, and in the end, okay, it's that song today. We got to do it. And you try and if anyone can come up with another name. I mean, it's a bit late now, but I'd be very interested. I think maybe something like Carrie Ann. No, it doesn't work. And also, I think the Hollies had already used that. I just couldn't think of another name. I didn't want to use that name. And then I thought, well, only my close friends will know the full story anyway. But a journalist called David Wigg knew Caroline and knew me and did a whole page. I wouldn't have thought it's that interesting a story, but he did a whole page about this song in the Daily Express, a national newspaper. And of course, the secret's out. And in the end, I hope she wasn't embarrassed by it. And it didn't really embarrass me. I didn't mind. But if I could have thought of another name, I think, just for a point of view of being a bit discreet, I think I probably would have used another name, but it wasn't to be.
So just coming up to date then, because obviously, you followed that with two more classics of the time. Ennismore, which was named after the square in Knightsbridge, obviously, which some people may not know. And Journey, the third album. Which was your favourite out of those three, which were recorded in fairly quick succession, by the way, as well? I mean, to come out with that amount of quality in terms of the writing and the production of the songs and the albums in total in such a short period of time was particularly exceptional.
Well, thank you. I think in those days it was traditional that people would record lots of albums very quickly, probably one a year. But remembering that you're touring at the same time and you've got to write the songs and you've got to record them, with hindsight, I think it's too much. And I think really the standard of the albums decreased. I think 1 year is the best one, and Ennismore is the second best, and Journey, which was the third one, is not quite up to the first two, I don't think. I think my songs were a bit weak on Journey, with the exception of one. Let's Keep the Curtains Closed is one of the best songs I've ever written, I think. But otherwise, I think my song, I was running out of ideas. I needed a break, really. But it was a good time. I really enjoyed that period, writing those songs and recording at Abbey Road. And last year, when I played at the Union Chapel with my solo band, we recorded the whole concert, and in the second half we played 1 year live with strings, and there's a DVD, CD of the first half and CD of 1 year in a box set that's just been released, and it's a lovely box set, well designed. I'm absolutely knocked out with it, really, and I think 1 year sounds really good. And Rod Argent said to me, who was the co-producer of the original album, he said, I'm not sure whether I don't prefer the live version to the studio version, because you've got the added excitement of the audience and knowing it's a live version. And I was really thrilled that he said that. So that literally has just been released.
And you're out on solo tour.
I've just come back from America, a few days ago.
And
I'm going out in the UK in the whole of May. So if anyone wants to come and see the solo show, all the dates are on my website, and I'll be touring throughout May this year.
It's clear to see then that you still get as much pleasure now as you did 60 years ago from watching some, and I was on last night, I was looking at various clips of live performances over the years, more recent ones as well. You are at home. Your home is the stage. It is the live environment, isn't it?
Well, I'd like to think so. I do enjoy it. I think it's part of the job, if you like. I like to write. I like to record. I like the whole process of recording, and I like to play live. And I think, especially in the business today, you need to be involved in all three aspects of the record industry: writing, recording, and playing live. And it comes, I have to work at it, but I mean, it comes quite naturally to me, and I enjoy it, and I hope to do it for a few years yet. As long as I'm physically able to do it, I'm going to keep doing it.
Well, I was going to say, you're looking great You're looking in great shape, and you're sounding great as well. I mean, again, as I said, I was watching some of this stuff, some of the live stuff that is out there over the last few days, and you have managed to maintain the quality of your voice. You know, there's little different, you know, between now and, I don't know, 20, 25, 30 years ago. It still it's unmistakably you is what it is. And there's no sort of, you know, huge deterioration.
Well, I do work at it, and I trained with a very good vocal coach quite late in life, actually, who gave me a little knowledge of singing technique and some vocal exercises, which when I'm on the road, I do those religiously twice a day. When I'm not on the road, I probably do them 2 or 3 times a week. And then I just look after myself now in a way that, of course, I didn't do when I was 19, and I'm sure no 19, 20-year-old artists do now. But the main thing is to stay hydrated, is especially, you know, if you're touring in hot countries. But you've got to make sure you drink enough water, eat sensibly, and get plenty of sleep. Exactly the opposite to what I was doing when I was 19. I got no sleep, ate rubbish, drank gallons of beer, and, you know, just was having a wonderful time. But I'm having a wonderful time now, but in a slightly different way.
So I'll leave you with a quote. Which I think very much fits. And it was somebody who said, the goal is not to live forever, but to create something that will. And if you look back to what you've done, that fits you perfectly, because you've created many things that will live forever. Music.
Well, it's a lovely thought, isn't it? I do hope so. And as I said earlier, I love that thought, but my focus and my energy always goes into what's next. I'm recording a new album at the moment, which hopefully will be out next year. And we're talking about touring dates next year already. So that's what I'm looking forward to.